This is part 2 of a video that I was filming this morning. I was talking about fertilizer. I ran out of space on my phone, so I had to delete my old videos to film the rest of this. Fertilizer does have its benefits, okay? Fertilizer has its benefits. Fertilizer can be a good thing. Fertilizer, if there's too much of it though, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. Very true with fertilizer. Fertilizer can do a lot to improve the quality of a soil. For example, like a good example is nitrogen. Nitrogen fertilizer. What it is that people take atmospheric nitrogen. They take nitrogen from the air, then they run it through machines to solidify it to put in soil. From my understanding, that is how nitrogen is made. In a very simplified explanation. Nitrogen is all around us in the atmosphere. It's everywhere. Like the air that we're breathing, right? The air that human beings breathe has nitrogen in it. So that nitrogen is solidified, then applied to this soil as fertilizer. In nature, so atmospheric nitrogen in nature, when there's like a thunderstorm, the heat from lightning generates an incredible amount of heat. When that heat from lightning will fuse nitrogen molecules into rain. And so when there's a big old thunderstorm, when there's a huge thunderstorm, that thunderstorm water has nitrogen in it. That's why plants look like they're growing a whole lot better after a good thunderstorm. It's because one major reason is because that rain has nitrogen in it. Essentially nitrogen fertilizer in it. Atmospheric nitrogen that got fused into the water from the heat of lightning. Slowpoke's back here now too. He's doing a lot better. He's doing a lot. He's a lot healthier, a lot stronger now. So he's actually wandering around with these animals. So that's very good. These animals are just hanging out by this tree line. It's a good spot for them. They like to hang out back here so that they get some shade. But yep. But the things, okay, so nitrogen, fertilizer. Thing about applying fertilizer is that you got to be very careful. You got to be very strategic, because fertilizer is one of those things. Like if I put too much fertilizer on this field, it could do a very substantial amount of damage to a field, to a point where it actually starts killing plant material. It's called fertilizer toxicity. So fertilizer, if I put too much fertilizer on a field, it can chemically bleach the soil. So if I put too much fertilizer on a field, the field will start turning like it's got salt crusts on it. That's a huge indicator of over fertilizing. This soil still looks like soil. There's zero signs of chemical bleaching anywhere. The grass is all growing in good. Everything looks good. That fertilizer, but it's important to be very methodical when applying fertilizer to a field. My suggestion is if like a person has zero idea or zero experience with soil in terms of being able to calculate fertilizer concentrations, observing plant material to develop an idea of saturation points for certain fertilizers, etc. They should just get a soil test. Get a soil test. That soil test will give it's a very it's a way for people to understand what's going on with their soil just by looking at a piece of paper, looking at numbers on a piece of paper. Universities will just I think that it's just like take a scoop of soil, take a couple scoops of soil from a field, put it in a plastic bag, then send it off to a lab at a local university that offers soil testing. then they'll analyze that soil for plant nutrients and all sorts of stuff. I'll put a link in my description for a website that allows people to just take their GPS location or their address, then get soil information via a satellite. This satellite information is very good for like if I walked onto a new field that had zero fertilizer put on it in like 20 years, or if it's just a completely brand new field. Like this one, it was a cornfield before I got here, but the previous owner had done zero farming on this property, and so it's practically a raw field. And he was here for many years, so it's practically a raw field. It's practically just a blank canvas. And so if it's a raw field, taking a look at satellite data is very, very, very good information, because, well, that data will be accurate. How I personally got soil information on this soil here was that I grew tomatoes last year. I grew tomatoes, and while I was growing those tomatoes, I created saturation curves. So what I mean by saturation curves is like if I have a graph like this, like one of those XY graphs, and then I plotted on the bottom, I put a fertilizer concentration, and then on top over here I put a amount of plant growth. If I began to increase the fertilizer concentration, this graph like this would start to look like this. So plant growth would go up as fertilizer concentration goes up. Then it would kind of plateau. It would go kind of sideways, and at a certain point it would actually start to dip. It would actually start to go down. And so that saturation curve, what that means is that as fertilizer is increased, plant growth increases. Then at a certain point there's a level of saturation. So plant growth has practically topped. That plant growth has hit a maximum. Adding more fertilizer is producing zero results, and then applying too much fertilizer is actually causing negative growth in plants. And so I was able to collect saturation data. That's what I call saturation data. So finding that point of saturation where the plant material begins to plateau from a fertilizer application. But in all honesty, when looking at a graph like that, getting to that point of saturation is less important than just getting onto the upswing. And so, long story short, it's better to have under-fertilized a little bit than to have over-fertilized, because over-fertilization will either get to a point of saturation, or even worse, it'll cause negative plant growth. So it's better to go light-handed on fertilizer than it is to go too heavy-handed on fertilizer. And so like when I look at my grass now, is it actually at a point of saturation? Who knows? I could run more tests on this field to see if the grass will grow more from more fertilizer application. But in all honesty, for what the purpose of the grass here is to feed cattle and maybe grow hay. And for those purposes, this grass is just fine. And so could I push the yields up? If I were going to push the yields up, okay, so if I added more fertilizer to this field to push the yields up, I would also need to be very worried about nitrate poisoning. So hay, well, okay, so feeding this hay to cattle, if I put a whole bunch of fertilizer on this field, like I quadrupled the amount of nitrogen fertilizer I put on this field just to see what the results would be. One, I put myself at extreme risk of chemically bleaching the soil, causing negative plant growth. I also put myself at risk of causing the nitrate poisoning in these cattle. And so in all intents and purposes, for what I'm looking to grow grass here for right now, the grass here is just fine. You know, if I can feed 1,500 pounds of cattle per acre, if I can feed 2,500 pounds of cattle per acre, that's completely fine. I'm doing good. I would consider that okay. I would rather just consider this okay. And so if I consider this okay at 70 pounds of nitrogen per acre, I'm gonna take that 70 pounds of nitrogen per acre, then just get data about grass growth. So if in a laboratory it took 17:1 to 19 nitrogen phosphorus potassium ratio to grow plants properly, and I know that I have a nitrogen deficiency as well as a phosphorus deficiency in this field, I'm gonna take that 70 pounds of nitrogen, then I'm gonna do 10 pounds of phosphorus to run a 7:1 ratio. If I was gonna run a 10:1 ratio, I would take that 70 pounds of nitrogen, then add 7 pounds of phosphorus to add that balance of nutrition to the soil. So that's the long story short of how I calculate fertilizer. If I were to walk onto a field and say I have zero time to collect data on any nitrogen or anything like that, I would just okay, so in all honesty, if I were going to be completely if I were going to do this all over again, I would do it the exact same way I did it. The conditions for my soil is that my drainage is moderately good, my pH is 7.8, and my calcium carbonate concentration is very high. With those three things in mind, I am able to just go, oh, okay, my calcium should be fine, my magnesium should be fine, my potassium should also be fine too. With such a high pH, I would conclude that those three things minimal concern, because those three molecules other than salt is what is most responsible for raising the soil pH. And this soil has been has had zero farming done on it in many years. So the natural qualities of this soil are just what this soil are. So this soil just naturally has a high pH, has a naturally high calcium carbonate concentration. So that is likely a result from a blend of those four elements, whatever element molecule, I don't know what it's called, but it's potassium, calcium, magnesium, salt are most responsible in nature for raising soil pH. And this is prime farmland according to USDA, or is it USDA? But this is, I'm pretty sure it's USDA that classifies farmland as prime farmland, but this is prime farmland. And so there are many things, there are a lot of things that go into considering what to do on a field. But when considering what to do on a field, in all honesty, on most fields, like 90% of fields, just putting nitrogen fertilizer on a field is usually enough to increase yields substantially. Just putting a little bit of nitrogen. If somebody is extremely worried, like if a person is extremely worried about burning their field, they just want to grow some extra grass for their animals to eat, in all honesty, I would suggest just doing like 35 pounds of nitrogen per acre. On 90% of fields, just adding 35 pounds of nitrogen per acre will provide a substantial return on investment, as well as increase the quality of soil drastically. 35 to 50 pounds of nitrogen per acre will hardly almost any soil will do a very good, and at a minimal cost. If I get a ton of fertilizer for $650, 100 pounds would be $65. And so yeah, putting about 35-50 pounds of nitrogen on an acre would cost about $65 per acre. And that investment will grow a tremendous on most fields will generally like as in 9 out of 10 or more fields will benefit from nitrogen application. And so if a person just, that's all, that they don't want to do a soil test, they don't have an idea on how to collect saturation data on fertilizers, or how to observe plant material for nutrient deficiencies, the thing that I would do most of the time is to just add some nitrogen. Just add some nitrogen. That's it. Just nitrogen. Just to keep it as simple as possible. Most people would benefit drastically from just adding a little bit of nitrogen to their soil. Other than that, if a person was going to go they're going to go a little bit more optimized, the two best routes would either be learn how to observe plant material for deficiencies, or what is most because that takes a long time. Like for me to learn how to just look at a plant and go, oh, this plant needs an adjustment of phosphorus, or it is likely to it has a like when I look at this grass right now, I see a grass, like a lot of people just see a field of grass and they go, oh, this looks good. But to me right now, what I'm seeing is a phosphorus deficiency as well as a sulfur deficiency. And the reason that I'm seeing it, well, I mean, it's the grass is a little bit too dark. It's just a little bit too dark. And sulfur, okay, so sulfur, if the tips of the plants like this right here, if the tips of the plants look like they're losing their color, the tips, just their tips, bottom half of that plant looks fine. If the tips look like they're losing their color, it's sulfur or calcium usually, because calcium and sulfur are immobile in the plant. Nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. If a plant is having a nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium deficiency, they will pull it from their old growth and supply it to their new growth. So they'll pull those minerals, those nutrients away from other plant material, older plant material, to apply it to the new plant material so that the plant continues to grow. Calcium and sulfur are immobile, so they're trapped in the plant. Once they get to a certain portion of the plant, they're stuck. And there are other nutrients, but those are the 5 big ones: nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, sulfur. And so, but to learn how to do this properly and then to calculate the ratios of fertilizer to apply, that takes a lot of experience and it takes a lot of time. And the one way, you know, to get around that, although, you know, like soil testing, if a person is really good at visually analyzing soil for nutrients, it's hard to beat, even with soil testing. Just because, like, I could walk out into a field and within 10 minutes I could have an understanding of what fertilizers need to be put down on the acreage and what concentrations. Whereas in soil testing, I need to send that data off. I need to send my soil off to a lab. They need to analyze it and send me the information back. That takes time, and then I'll have to go out there afterwards. So, like, it's a lot more efficient. Well, okay, for me, you know, like if I can raise, you know, 3,500 pounds of cattle per acre of land, I would consider that just fine for all intents and purposes here. Like, I could probably push that number up to about 5,000 pounds once I get the phosphorus and sulfur into this field. And so, but the soil testing, you know, I would do it just to have a sheet of information in front of me, because I think it'd be pretty cool. And so maybe I will do it at one point, but as of right now, like, my cattle are just fine. They're all just fine. Everyone is super heavy. These cattle are super heavy. My grass is growing in at an unbelievable rate. I mean, there was a buffet for these cattle right now. So, you know, in terms of so far, so good. But yeah. So, I mean, there's a lot of stuff that goes on with fertilizer, but just be very, very, very careful. Fertilizer can be an extremely good thing for land. It can be an extremely good thing for plant material, for the soil itself. It can be a very good thing, but when it's over applied, it can do some serious damage. Like, people can really mess up their soil. They can also really mess up water. That's another thing about over applying fertilizer, is that if fertilizer is over applied, it can leach into water, and water with fertilizer in it can really mess up animals too. That can be a huge problem too. So, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on. That's it for me today, YouTube. Y'all have a good one.